This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real events. Names, dates, locations, and identifying details have been changed or dramatized to protect privacy and enhance the narrative. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental or used fictitiously. This content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not aim to glorify crime, promote violence, or pass judgment on real individuals. Viewer discretion is advised. Some scenes may contain mature, disturbing, or triggering content. What you are about to watch could have happened anywhere, to anyone. It's inspired by real events. Whispers of truth buried beneath layers of fiction. We've changed the names, the dates, the locations, but the emotions, the betrayal, the fear, those are real. This story is not meant to accuse, only to reveal, to make you question, who do you really trust? If stories like this keep you thinking, long after they end, hit subscribe, smash like, and drop your theory in the comments. Now watch closely, before the truth disappears again.
The cliff was beautiful that day. Sunlight cut across the waves, gulls wheeled in the distance, and the wind carried the smell of salt and freedom. To anyone else, it was a place of peace, but for her, it became a place of betrayal. They stood side by side, husband and wife, a couple admired for their smiles, their pictures, their perfect facade. Yet on that cliff, perfection shattered. 1 second she gazed at the horizon. The next, the ground disappeared beneath her. A scream ripped through the air, cut short by the violence of her fall. Rocks split the silence as her body struck below. He stood above, watching. No tears, no panic. Only the steady breath of a man convinced his plan had worked. He had chosen the place, rehearsed the story, measured every detail. And now, with her broken body lying in the surf, he believed the future was his again. Unbound, unchecked, untouched by her presence. The waves licked crimson against stone. To the world, it could be called a tragic accident. To him, it was victory. But every crime leaves a shadow. And this one, staged on the edge of a cliff, was about to unravel in ways he could never imagine. This is the story of a husband who thought he had silenced his wife forever. A story of greed, betrayal, and the illusion of the perfect crime. On that cliff, a marriage ended. And so did the illusion that murder can ever be buried. Long before the cliff, there was the picture of happiness. Neighbors would have told you Daniel and Emily Ward were the kind of couple others admired. Polished, successful, the kind who threw dinner parties, where laughter filled the room and photographs captured nothing but smiles. At 40, Daniel had built a career that gave him respect. At 35, Emily still carried the hope that devotion and patience could hold a marriage together. Together, they seemed like the perfect match, but perfection is often a mask. Behind the closed doors of their home, shadows gathered. Daniel's charm, once intoxicating, began to twist into control. Questions disguised as concern became interrogations. Where were you? Who were you with? His need for dominance grew heavier with each passing year. And yet, in public, his hand never left Emily's shoulder, his smile never faltered. Once, at a dinner party, he corrected her with a laugh that charmed the guests, but left Emily silent, her cheeks burning. To friends, they were inseparable. To her, it was a slow suffocation. Emily clung to her vows, convincing herself that endurance was love, that storms passed if you stood still long enough. But the house grew colder. Arguments ignited over the smallest things. Dinner late by 10 minutes, money spent without his permission, the way she spoke too warmly to strangers. Each fight left scars no one else could see. Their home sat not far from the sea, cliffs rising like jagged teeth against the horizon. The beauty that had drawn them there began to feel like a silent omen, isolation wrapped in grandeur. Emily often walked those paths, staring at the drop below, never imagining how soon it would define her fate. And still, she smiled in photographs. She greeted neighbors warmly, kept the house immaculate, played the role expected of her. Because in their world, appearance mattered more than truth. A wife kept her silence. A husband commanded the stage. This was the life before the fall, a marriage praised from the outside, poisoned on the inside. A life where Daniel's control dressed as devotion and Emily's love quietly curdled into fear. and all it would take was one step on a cliff's edge to shatter it forever. By 40, Daniel Ward had everything a man could want: respect in his profession, a comfortable home, and a wife admired by neighbors. But under the surface, his charm had soured into entitlement. Daniel wasn't satisfied with what he had. He wanted more. More money, more freedom, more control. Emily, 35, still fought for the marriage. She smoothed over his moods, hoping patience might heal what anger had fractured. But the more she tried, the further Daniel drifted. The cracks widened slowly at first. A late night explained away his work. A receipt in his pocket from a place he'd never mentioned. Whispers in town about a woman, younger, carefree, reckless, who laughed too easily at his jokes and lingered too long at his side. Emily sensed it, but silenced her doubts, convincing herself it was paranoia. But each lie Daniel spun only emboldened him. Then money became his weapon. He spoke of planning for the future, of securing their life together. Insurance papers appeared on the table, slid toward her with the calm authority of a husband making responsible decisions. Emily signed them, never imagining her neat, trusting signature had just become the weapon Daniel would later turn against her. Friends began to notice her change. Emily, once vibrant and quick to laugh, grew quieter. Her smile thinned, her eyes carried shadows. Daniel dismissed concern with practiced charm, playing the part of a husband burdened by stress. Behind closed doors, his mask slipped further. His temper snapped easily, bruises hidden under long sleeves, words sharpened into knives. Emily felt the weight of betrayal pressing in, yet clung to the belief that love could still be salvaged. She didn't know Daniel's mind had already moved on, rehearsing a future where she did not exist. And in that future, he saw everything he craved: the freedom of a widower, the thrill of life unbound, the warmth of another woman who made him feel alive again, and the wealth of an insurance payout waiting to be claimed. Each lie that went undiscovered, each bruise that went unseen, each signature that went unquestioned. To Daniel, they were victories. Proof that his plan was working. Proof that fate itself was on his side. But every secret casts a shadow, and Daniel's was already reaching the cliffs near their home. Jagged stone, endless waves, the place he had chosen long before she ever looked over the edge. On the surface, it looked like healing. Friends noticed Daniel and Emily smiling again, dining together in public, even planning a weekend trip to the coast. To outsiders, it seemed the Wards had turned a corner, as if time and patience had mended what anger had torn. At 35, Emily wanted to believe it. At 40, Daniel only wanted freedom. He played his part well. Flowers on the table, softer words, promises of quiet time away. He booked a cottage overlooking the cliffs and spoke of reconnecting, of long walks and fresh air. Emily, weary from years of strain, clung to the fragile peace. She let herself believe she had her husband back. But for Daniel, the trip was not about saving a marriage. It was the final rehearsal for a crime he had imagined for months. The weather was perfect that weekend. A sky so blue it seemed painted, waves rolling in steady rhythm against the rocks below. They walked the trails hand in hand, Daniel careful to squeeze her hand just enough to look tender, never enough to betray the iron grip behind it. To anyone passing by, they were a couple in love. To Daniel, they were actors, and he was writing the final scene. Emily's heart softened. She spoke of the future again, of rebuilding, of how grateful she was for this chance to start over. Daniel nodded, eyes drifting past her shoulder to the jagged stone where the waves foamed below. At night, he raised a glass over dinner, smiling as candlelight flickered across his face. Emily saw the man she had once fallen in love with. Daniel saw a woman whose life was almost over. The cracks were there if anyone had looked closely. His voice shook once when he promised her forever. His eyes lingered too long on the cliffs, but Emily ignored them, desperate for hope. On the final day, Daniel suggested one last walk before heading home. Emily agreed, smiling, lighter than she had been in years. To her, it was a golden moment. Proof that love could survive anything. But golden ages never last. They shimmer briefly before collapsing into ruin. And as they neared the cliff's edge, Daniel wasn't thinking of love or healing or forever. He was thinking of how Silence would look with her body broken on the rocks below. The morning of their final walk broke calm and golden. Waves curled white against the rocks below. Gulls wheeled high above, and the cliffs stretched like the edge of the world. To Emily, it felt like a promise. A quiet ending to a beautiful weekend. The chance to carry home the memory of peace. To Daniel, it was opportunity. They walked the path in silence, the ocean wind tugging at Emily's hair. Her laughter carried faintly on the breeze. Daniel smiled when she looked his way, his eyes warm, his arms steady at her back. To her, it felt like closeness. To him, it was positioning. As they neared the edge, Daniel slowed. The rocks below foamed with the violent crash of waves, their roar drowning out every other sound. He guided Emily closer, pointing at the horizon. She leaned forward, resting her weight on the stone. In that moment, she was trusting. She was unguarded. And then, a shove. Emily's scream tore through the air, echoing against the cliff face before it was swallowed by the sea. Her body hit the rocks with a sound that made the gulls scatter, then disappeared into the foam below. Daniel stood above. His chest rose once, then steadied, as if the push had only lifted a burden from his shoulders. No panic, no rush to call for help, only calculation. He looked down, saw her motionless body tossed by the surf, and turned away. To him, it was finished. By the time rescuers reached the scene, Daniel had already rehearsed his story. A tragic accident. His wife had slipped while admiring the view. He had tried to save her, but the ground crumbled beneath her feet. He spoke with the calm sorrow of a grieving husband. His performance was almost flawless. Almost. Because Emily wasn't dead. Her body broken, lungs burning, she clawed back from the edge of darkness. Bones shattered, skin torn, she refused to surrender. Each wave tried to claim her, but each breath she stole back from the sea was defiance. And when rescuers finally reached her, they didn't find a corpse. They found breath. Shallow, rasping, but undeniable. Daniel's perfect crime cracked in that moment. At first, he told himself she would die in the hospital, but she didn't. Days turned into weeks, and Emily endured. Jaw wired shut, body bound in casts. She couldn't yet speak, but her eyes told the story. Fear, betrayal, rage. And when her voice returned, so did the truth. Investigators combed the cliff, measured angles, tested soil. They asked Daniel why his account shifted with each telling. Why had he waited so long to call for help? Why did his grief feel rehearsed? And then Emily spoke. Her voice was weak, but her words were clear. He pushed me. The courtroom fell silent. Every eye turned toward her as those 3 words shattered Daniel's future. The husband who thought his wife's voice had been silenced forever now stood accused by the very woman he had tried to kill. The trial became a stage. Prosecutors painted Daniel as a man of greed and control, a husband who saw an insurance payout and a mistress as reasons to murder. Witnesses stepped forward, friends who had seen Emily's bruises, neighbors who had noticed her silences, colleagues who had whispered about his late nights. Piece by piece, the mask was torn away, but nothing cut deeper than Emily's testimony. Fragile but unbroken, she described the moment on the cliff, the sudden shove, the last thing she saw before the rocks rushed up to meet her. Daniel's face calm and steady. The jury saw it too. Daniel had gambled everything on silence, but silence never came. The wife he tried to silence became the witness who would never let him escape. When the verdict was read, the courtroom sat frozen. Daniel Ward, once admired for his charm, condemned by his own wife's voice, guilty of attempted murder. His sentence was not just years in a cell, it was the collapse of every illusion he had built. The career, the reputation, the image of the perfect husband, all gone in a single word. Guilty. Emily sat quietly as the gavel fell. At 35, she bore the scars of betrayal, the cast on her arm, the stiffness in her walk, the ache that would never leave her bones. But she was alive, and that was the one thing Daniel had never counted on. In the weeks that followed, their story rippled through the community. Neighbors who once envied the couple now whispered in disbelief. How could a man so polished hide such darkness? How could a woman so kind endure such cruelty and survive? Their names became a warning. A reminder that evil often wears a smile. For Emily, survival was more than breath. Each painful step was proof that his push had failed. Each word she spoke in court was louder than the gavel. But survival left shadows too. Nights haunted by the sound of waves, by the memory of his shove, by the image of Daniel's calm face as she fell. The cliff became a place she could never return to, yet also the symbol of her strength. Her story traveled far from that jagged edge, whispered in churches, retold in homes, studied in classrooms. It was passed on as a reminder that appearances deceive, that control dressed as devotion is only another name for abuse, that no crime is perfect when truth refuses to stay buried. And in every telling, the questions lingered. How many Emilys smile in photographs while living in silence? How many Daniels stand in crowds, charming, respected, hiding the rot beneath? Daniel lost everything he believed he had won. Emily lost the life she once knew, but she gained something rarer, the chance to tell her story. And in that story lived a truth that outlasted the trial, the cliff, the pain. The cliff that was meant to bury her became the place that proved silence can never win. Every crime leaves a mark, but not every victim is silenced. Daniel Ward believed a shove from a cliff would erase his wife, his vows, his past. He believed money, lies, and charm could bury the truth forever. But truth has a way of clawing back to the surface. At 35, Emily Ward carried scars she would never lose. But she also carried something Daniel never expected: strength sharpened by survival. Her testimony echoed louder than his lies, her presence heavier than his schemes. She became the voice he could never silence, and that is the legacy of this story. Evil can plot, plan, and push, but it cannot erase. Love twisted into control may shatter trust, but it cannot kill truth. The question left behind is one we must all carry. What happens when the person we trust most turns against us? How many faces of devotion hide shadows beneath the smile? The waves still crash against the cliffs, the same way they did on the day she fell. But the silence Daniel hoped for never came. The cliff was meant to silence her forever. Instead, it became the place where her survival spoke louder than his crime.